Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. House Democrats have released two new transcripts from the impeachment inquiry into President Trump. And one includes a major revision describing a quid pro quo with Ukraine. The pair of depositions came from Kurt Volker and Gordon Sondland. Volker is the former U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine, and Sondland is the U.S. Ambassador to the European Union. Sondland's testimony is making headlines due to his substantial update from his original statement. Sondland revealed that he told a Ukrainian military official the country would likely not receive American military aid unless it publicly committed to the investigations President Trump wanted. Let's bring in Nancy Cook and Mike DeBonis. Nancy is a White House reporter for Politico. She is in Arlington, Virginia. Mike is a congressional reporter for The Washington Post. He is on Capitol Hill. Welcome to both of you. Nancy, let me begin with you. Why is this updated testimony from Gordon Sondland significant?
Well, it's significant because the White House had originally seen Sondland's testimony as something that really bolstered their idea that there was no quid pro quo, that the president wasn't asking the Ukrainian president to investigate his political rivals and withholding military aid to do so. Sondland revised his testimony after a number of other people went up to Capitol Hill and gave contradictory information. And it's really a political blow to the White House because Sondland is now saying that there was some evidence that the president wanted the Ukrainian president to investigate his rivals in exchange for this money. And so it's a big deal because it just takes away one of the White House's key talking points and a key witness who's saying that, there was a sense that these things were necessary.
Well, Mike, where could this new development lead impeachment investigators next?
Well, I think that it only confirms sort of the narrative that the Democrats on the committee had already sort of committed to, that there was in fact a quid pro quo, that there's mounting evidence that it did in fact occur, and that this was known inside the Trump administration, both in the State Department, on the National Security Council, and otherwise. So I don't know that it's necessarily a breakthrough. I think that it certainly shows that here's someone, as Nancy said, thought to be a Trump loyalist, someone who would sort of hew to the party line, who in fact presented with the credible testimony of other witnesses like Bill Taylor, the U.S. envoy in Ukraine, that they would change their stories essentially and confirm what Democrats are in fact saying happened.
Well, Mike, beyond this revision from Sondland, were there any other big takeaways from these new transcripts?
Well, I think generally speaking, they supported the Democratic narrative. I think that Republicans did find certain things in both the testimony from Ambassador Sondland and Mr. Volker, Ambassador Volker, who was the special envoy to Ukraine, that sort of support a couple talking points that they've been putting forward, one of which is that Ukraine didn't know that the aid was being withheld, and therefore it couldn't have been a quid pro quo if it hadn't been communicated to them that there was something being withheld to force them to do what President Trump wanted. That's basically what they've doubled down on today. And there were some snippets in the transcripts that support that notion. But Democrats are saying that that's really not a required element here. It's more about the motive of the president, the motive of the administration, what they had in mind, and what their intentions were in terms of trying to get Ukraine to commit to these investigations, to do what President Trump wanted, in conducting these investigations.
And Nancy, for our viewers who are not following every step of the impeachment process closely, remind us who Sondland and Volker are and why they're important.
Well, Sondland is really important because he was the ambassador to Ukraine, and he gave a bunch of money. He was a key Trump ally, and he gave a bunch of money to the Trump inauguration. And so he was really seen as someone who was really like in the Trump inner circle. And the fact that he changed his testimony is really quite significant.
And Mike, a pair of officials from the Trump administration skipped their hearings that were scheduled for Tuesday. Who are they, and are they facing any repercussions for not testifying?
One of them, these are mid-level officials in the White House. One of them, Michael Duffy, is a assistant director at the Office of Management and Budget. He's been described by multiple witnesses of having some knowledge of the of the decision to withhold the aid. The other official is a gentleman named Wells Griffith, who's a National Security Council director dealing with energy. He spent some time as a deputy to Rick Perry, the energy secretary. He too is described as having some knowledge of these discussions. It's not known exactly what they would testify to, but they were sort of in the mix as this all was playing out. House Democrats wanted to get them on the record. It's unclear what their refusal to testify is going to mean. They basically said, the White House has said, we don't need to testify, we're not going to testify. It's unclear if Democrats are going to go to court to seek their testimony, but they've said that this will be used as evidence of obstruction by the president as they pursue impeachment.
And Nancy, a senior advisor to Vice President Mike Pence is reportedly likely to comply with the request to testify in the impeachment inquiry on Thursday. What are investigators looking to find out from Jennifer Williams?
Well, it's really interesting that Jennifer Williams is even considering testifying, because the White House has been trying to argue that no White House officials at all should be testifying because of this idea that absolute immunity, that they are senior advisors and to the president, and they should not talk about privileged conversations that they had with the president. So it's fascinating that if she does testify, she will be bucking this directive from the White House counsel. But what they could learn from her is that she was on the July 25th call between the president and President Donald Trump and the Ukrainian president. And I think what she could shed light on is whether or not she had concerns about the call, if she relayed those concerns to Vice President Michael Pence. She also traveled at one point to Europe with Pence and met with the Ukrainian president. And so I think that she can shed a lot of light on what Pence knew and what he knew about the call, what he knew about the conversation surrounding Ukraine. And I think that that could be really interesting as Democrats try to piece together how far up the food chain in the White House this actually went.
And Mike, we have learned that impeachment investigators have asked acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney to appear for a deposition Friday. This is not a subpoena, but Mulvaney has not complied with a previous subpoena for documents. Do House Democrats expect Mulvaney to participate this time around?
I don't think that they expect him to show up this week. I expect that they'll probably issue a subpoena, and he's probably not going to comply with that. I think not only do you have the weight of the White House's position on this, which is that they're not cooperating with what they see as a biased investigation, you do have the whole weight of history that, testimony from close White House advisors, like a chief of staff, is exceedingly rare. The question is that does that change in an impeachment scenario? You do have some precedent in the Nixon impeachment. H.R. Haldeman, as a former chief of staff, came in and testified to the Senate Watergate Committee. It's pretty clear that Mulvaney at this point is not going to be testifying absent some sort of court intervention, and it's clear that that probably is not going to happen in any sort of expeditious manner.
Well, at a Trump rally last night, Mike, Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul called on the media to reveal the identity of the whistleblower who raised concerns about President Trump's call with the Ukrainian president. Here's that clip.
We also now know the name of the whistleblower. The whistleblower needs to come before Congress as a material witness because he worked for Joe Biden at the same time Hunter Biden was getting money from corrupt oligarchs. I say tonight to the media, do your job and print his name.
So, Mike, how have Paul's fellow Republicans on Capitol Hill responded?
A few have embraced it, very few, but most have sort of just looked the other way. I think that most Republicans aren't particularly interested in getting into this litigation of who was the whistleblower. I think they realize that, the bulk of what the whistleblower put in his complaint has now been corroborated on the record in these closed-door depositions by witness after witness after witness. But there are a number of loyalists to President Trump who believe that the whistleblower is sort of the key to this political conspiracy aimed at the president, rather than somebody who, is simply raising concerns about the president's conduct itself. There just seems to be a continual pushing of the envelope by President Trump's allies in trying to unmask this person, get this person revealed, and sort of take accountability for this complaint, even though that, everything else we've seen from these other witnesses has corroborated what the whistleblower is saying.
Right. And Nancy, the summary of the Ukraine call has been released. So why is the identity of the whistleblower important to the White House and allies?
Well, I think the White House and President Trump have been making the argument repeatedly over the last few weeks that they think that the whistleblower is somehow partisan. The president feels like he did nothing wrong. He feels like the call was totally appropriate. He's called it repeatedly a perfect call. And so I think that there is some interest in identifying who the whistleblower is and seeing if that person has some partisan bias, as the White House and President Trump keeps implying. I think that the problem that a lot of even Senate Republicans are saying is that, going against the whistleblower breaks the rule of law. There are laws that protect whistleblowers, that protect people from retaliating against whistleblowers. And there's a sense that that's not necessarily a precedent that at least Republicans in the Senate seem to want to break.
And Mike, CBS News has learned that House Republicans might move Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan to the House Intelligence Committee. Why would they want to do that? And could the move face opposition from Democrats?
Well, it's like the World Series. The manager's going to want to put his best players in the lineup. I think that.
But it normally doesn't work that way, does it, Mike?
It can. The Intelligence Committee is a select committee, which means it's completely at the discretion of the party leader. Kevin McCarthy can unilaterally pick who's on this committee, and he indicated today in comments to Politico that he was going to do that. He was going to pick who he thought were going to be the most effective members on this particular committee. I don't think Democrats are necessarily going to have any problem with it. I think it would be a pretty troublesome precedent if they were to go and overrule the other party's picks on a select committee. So, if Republicans think this gives them the best chance to push their own case in these hearings, they're going to do that. And we'll wait to see what exactly Leader McCarthy does. It may just be Jim Jordan. They may look at even a couple others. The tricky part for them is that they've got to take members off that committee to put new ones on. And that can be some tricky internal politics.
I was going to ask, Mike, really quickly before we let you go, where does that leave Devin Nunes, for instance?
I'm assured that Devin Nunes will remain the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee. There are two Republican members of that committee who are retiring at the end of this Congress. There's a lot of speculation that one or both of them might be asked to step off in favor of Jordan and whoever else might get named. I think they're still sort of working out the politics of that internally. But it's clear that President Trump has a lot of faith in Jim Jordan, and that he would be very pleased to see him on the dais during these hearings.
All right, Nancy Cook and Mike DeBonis, thank you both. Really appreciate it.